Welcome to the League of Women Voters and the Alliance for the Arts Virtual Candidates Forum. Some of the League's voter service activities include candidate forums and voter guides. This information is made available to the voting public to help in their decision-making process. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that does not support or oppose candidates or political parties. Happy learning.
Welcome to a candidate forum presented by the League of Women Voters of Lee County in conjunction with the Alliance for the Arts. The purpose of these forums is to inform the voting public of the opinions of the candidates running for office. It's not a debate. There will be no crosstalk between the candidates. There won't be any comments from one candidate on another candidate's position. They will be given 2 minutes to open. They will be given 2 minutes to close. They will be given 1 minute to answer each question. The order of answering the questions and opening and closing is random, to be decided at the beginning of the forum itself. So sit back and enjoy. Thank you. Voting public to the House Seat 78. Today we have Charles Lynch and Sean Williams as candidates to the forum. I should say that every candidate was invited to attend this forum. Some didn't respond, some had something else they wanted to do today, but since Charlie and Sean are here, it's very important that we hear what they have to say. We're going to start the forum. So opening statement will be 2 minutes, closing statement will be 2 minutes. The questions will have 1 minute to answer, and we're going to start with Mr. Lynch and his opening statement.
Okay, well, thank you, Jim. My name is Charlie Lynch. I'm running District 78 for state representative. I am currently a healthcare consultant where I work on national platforms enabling patients to have their access to healthcare. When we talk about access to healthcare, a lot of people think, well, if I have a good policy, I'm covered. Well, there's a lot more that goes on behind the scenes, and I really think that Florida could be a leader in healthcare. If we wait for Washington to do it, it's not going to happen. You probably don't even know that your healthcare is under attack right now. 91% of all oncologists surveyed said that their first choice of drug was not given to their oncology patients. And what it is it's dictated by payers. I really think that we could take back some control. Some states have done a really good job with this. We could also limit co-pays and just make access to healthcare much better. In addition to that, I have an educational plan, one of which we teach our high school students a financial class, like a financial wellness class. Florida used to have an economic class for high school students, but in this class, if we have something like this, it'll teach students to know how to buy a car, buy a house, what interest is, what student loans are, and just make it more healthy. I also have a plan for industry. Florida, in Southwest Florida right now, Walmart is our Publix is our 4th employer, and Walmart's our number 6 employer. We need more industry within the state of Florida. We need clean industry, which will promote jobs. So we're not exporting our children and our grandchildren out of this, out of our community. Our community is growing and we need more industry. So within that, those are big platforms of mine. I know I can get the job done. We need new leadership. Time for new leadership in Southwest Florida is what it's about right now, to ensure that we all have a better quality of life. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Williams?
Yes, thank you. First, I want to thank the League for the great work they do in our communities. Spaces like this are very important. Whether you're here for healthcare, climate change, public education, good jobs, affordable housing, or policing and justice reform, you're in the exact right place, especially when so many are scared to leave their homes because of this pandemic. This failing governmental response proves now more than ever we need good government. You're here doing exactly what you should be, educating yourself on one of the most consequential elections of the generation. You see, I learned at a very early age the value of a hard day's work, and one of the most rewarding acts you can do is to give back to others. So I returned home to Fort Myers after college and worked as a CPA. I quickly learned that a company's budgets say a lot about their priorities, who and what they value, and how they give back to their community. But for me, Budgets are moral documents. Show me your budget and I'll tell you your priorities. And I'm running for House District 78 because I want to give back to our community through public service. I want to use my talents in listening to constituents and getting things done in Tallahassee. I'm not afraid to compromise, but I will never compromise my values. We need new voices in Tallahassee. We need to build a better community for all, where we can find common ground and find common purpose to attain our priorities together. Thank you.
Thank you. The first question will go to Mr. Lynch. Mr. Lynch, please describe and explain your position on Medicare expansion. And add in that, what do you propose should be done to increase healthcare coverage in Florida?
Okay, as far as Medicare expansion, before I really get into that really quickly, let me just say that I want open markets. Open markets will drive the cost down. When we have the cost driven down, what you can actually do is take people off your Medicare list. Now, there has been reports, and just some that were just recently printed by National Institute of Health and ASCO, which is an oncology-based organization, which basically says that a Medicare expansion, if you're one of the states who do not believe in expansion, you're one of the states who are going to have sicker and sicker patients, and more patients, oncology patients especially, die when there is not expansion in your state. There's also new studies out which shows that Florida is losing about $56 billion over the next 10 years in federal money by not having an expansion. So open the markets and we won't need an expansion. That's my solution. But with an expansion, Florida could bring in about $5.6 million per year.
Thank you. Mr. Williams?
Yeah, Florida has the third highest percentage of uninsured adults in the country. And the health of Floridians is not a red or blue issue. We can no longer simply treat the sick. We must start early detection and treatment early and at the root cause. I'll introduce and support legislation to expand community health clinics, reproductive justice, and Medicaid to ensure that every Floridian has early access to affordable quality health care. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, take this question. Do you support a minimum wage in Florida, and if so, at what level?
I do believe in a minimum wage, and I think that ours has been set impossibly low for families to survive in this economy. We pay our tipped workers $2.13 an hour, and bartenders $5 an hour. I think that is one of the lowest wages we have in the nation and in the world. We need to pay a living wage so people can afford housing, food, and family care. We do need to raise it. I don't know by how much or over how long we need to raise it by, but the marketplace is not taking care of this on their own. And unfortunately, when we raise the minimum wage, that is the floor and not the sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lynch?
Yes, as far as minimum wage right now, of course, it's too low. We see companies like Amazon stepping up to the plate, giving their employees $15 an hour. Now, I do feel $15 an hour is too much per hour for small businesses to insure, but I do think a state minimum wage at about $12.50 an hour would be a really good platform to start at and go from there. And whenever we talk about raising the minimum wage, we could also think about possibly excluding small businesses that might have less than 5 employees, where that would be devastating, that difference in pay. But to try to live in the state of Florida right now on minimum wage is unobtainable, as we've seen our housing costs have gone up. Our just cost of living in general is much higher than it was, let's say, just 5 years ago. So yes, I support an increase in minimum wage.
Okay. Mr. Lynch, what measures would you propose to preserve Florida's wetlands?
Okay, so this is a very, very important issue. As far as we know, water is everything we need in the state of Florida. We also have our farming industry being the second largest industry within the state of Florida. So we have to find balance between our agricultural community and our water quality. when you look at Lake O and how much water is released, the cause of, the water not flowing properly to the Everglades. I mean, these are all big issues. I think one of the most important things we need to do is enact laws that we're actually going to follow on these laws. When we have money set aside for these, do it, work on it, bring in all our talent from all our schools, University of Southwest Florida, Florida Gulf Coast University, bring in all this talent to come up with solutions. Excuse me. As far as what we said, I was saying before, water storage is a big issue, and that could really preserve a lot of our quality and where water gets redistributed. But it is paramount. It is like the #1 issue in Florida right now.
Thank you. Mr. Williams?
Certainly. Thank you for the question. Our land, our water, our beaches are our state's greatest treasures and our greatest economic assets. In Florida, economic strength and environmental health go hand in hand. I reject the false choice between economic prosperity and the healthy environment. Florida, however, needs to focus, then fund restoration of the Everglades natural flowway south of Lake O. And I will introduce and support legislation to grow mass transit, promote use of electric vehicles, transition to renewable energy, and prevent water pollution at its source to protect these flowways. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, do you have any proposals regarding the protection of our coastlines, that is addressing sea level changes?
Absolutely. Sea level change and sea level rise are one of our biggest existential threats to our state. We are a peninsula, and most of our population lives on the coastal areas. We are projected by 2030 to lose 120,000 homes on our coastlines, 48,000 just in the Jacksonville area. And this is unsustainable. We need to address climate change at its source, which is carbon emissions, and we need to begin a cleaner agricultural and waterways program to allow for the cleaning and the stopping of our carbon emissions in the state of Florida. That's why I would like to move to non-carbon based renewable energies such as solar and wind.
Thank you. Mr. Lynch?
Okay, as far as losing coastline, I mean, this is a problem throughout the country, and like Sean did mention, of course, Florida's peninsular, so it's very important for us. And within that, we have to look at how are we going to sustain ourselves, and is it going to be now that we're going to have to change building codes, building laws, so we're not building so close to the coast? Does it mean increasing funds for seawalls? I mean, this is a very complex problem. This is something that we're going to have to bring several people to the table. No candidate by themselves would have a solution to this, but what they need to do is bring the right people to the table, the right people who can fix this problem and take a great look at this problem. And, various causes of pollution, we know that. We know our environment is essential for our way of life in Florida. So again, I think bringing the best heads together, bringing the best people together, and be able to coordinate and be that person who can coordinate everything together to ensure that we don't lose any more coastline, or that we could slow down the prevention of loss of coastline.
Thank you. Mr. Lynch, what measures would you propose to control COVID-19 cases in Florida?
Okay, again, this is a very complex issue, and it seems to change on a daily basis. And, I did mention 2 weeks ago that the need to properly protect ourselves is crucial. It's extremely crucial. And of course, there was no surprise that a spike was going to come right after the 4th of July holiday, and getting into summer, we're going to, I believe, continue to see spikes, contrary to what some people believe. But I think the cities are doing a good job with deciding what their general population wants, masks or no masks. And I don't really think it needs to always come down to that, but I really think that businesses need to take control and prioritize what they think. If they don't want you coming in without a mask, then just don't go to that business. If you don't want to patronize them, that's fine. But again, I mean, we're in new uncharted territories. Masks have shown to be effective. I say wear your mask. If you're against wearing your mask, just realize that you may not go into certain counties within the state of Florida. And again, protection is the biggest thing. And you know, it's been said before, would you rather wear a mask or would you rather wear a ventilator mask?
Mr. Williams?
So again, I don't believe that the health of our state's residents or visitors and our state's economy are mutually exclusive. Florida's reopening must be deliberate, measured, and balanced between the two. We must contain COVID-19 through testing, tracing, and then selective isolation to successfully reopen our businesses and open those businesses only once. Too many Florida businesses have reopened, purchased inventory, some with perishable goods such as restaurants, then have to reclose due to health and safety concerns of the employees and the public. This is unsustainable. We also need to look at the economy that Florida has built. We have a large and growing percentage of employment through service industries. These present close contact with folks. Florida has an opportunity now to diversify its economy, the industries they attract and retain, and to retrain its workforce to fit into a 21st century economy. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Williams, would you support measures to end state preemption and allow local governments to expand regulation on environmental issues for the local areas?
To be honest with you, home rule is something out of the 50s and 60s here in Florida. Florida state used to regulate every aspect of Florida's economy, laws, rules, jurisdiction was statewide, and counties had very little. But we also had a library of laws on the books. And it came down to micromanagement. So what they did is they gave counties home rule to be able to rule their own jurisdictions as their citizenry felt necessary. I feel very strongly that the local representation is they have an ear to the ground of what's going on in their areas. So they are best set up to deal with those issues. I do not believe preemption should be a thing. I think that we should continue to allow local jurisdictions to do what is best for their citizens.
Thank you. Mr. Lynch?
And everything Sean said, I agree with. I'm in total agreement with that. I don't see where Tallahassee might not know exactly what's going on in each and every community. And home rule, I think people within your community, you're tighter and you want what's best for your community, and you're not overshadowed by the state maybe regulating or looking at a certain area rather than our own our own district. So our district is very important to us, especially Fort Myers, where water is essential. We want rule, and I think that's the way to go. Sean explained it very eloquently. It's important. Rather you take care of yourself better than you could take care of your neighbor. So let us take care of our own district.
Thank you. Mr. Lynch, what is your position on women's reproductive rights? Do you plan to introduce or support legislation which further restricts abortion or other reproductive rights of women?
Okay, well, there's a couple things that I'd like to say. Reproduction is important, and there's many different sides of reproduction. When we talk about reproductive rights, one right I'd like to talk about that most people in the state of Florida do not have is a right for fertility preservation. And what I mean by that is within two states, the state of Connecticut and the state of Rhode Island, a law was instituted in which insurance companies have to pay for the freezing and preservation of both eggs and semen in the event that a patient is no longer is undergoing some type of treatment which might render them sterile. So all this talk about women's rights, I think this is an important right, and actually this is legislation I'd like to get behind, a law that would mandate that your insurance companies have to pay for any type of fertility preservation in the event that you come up with a disease which might render you sterile. And this applies to both male and females. And when you think about it, somebody who's diagnosed with a new disease and now is going to potentially lose their ability to reproduce, I think this is a very important thing.
Thank you. Mr. Williams?
I will simply say this: women's health is just that, health. I believe in reproductive justice, which is not only a woman's right to choose, but a equitable judicial system, an economy that works for everyone, an public education system, the environment, healthcare, and access to the ballot box. These are all part of reproductive justice. And the big elephant in the room is, why are we trying to reopen our schools? Because we need childcare. We have a childcare crisis here in Florida that we need to allow working families to have access to childcare, affordable, quality childcare. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Williams, would you tell me what is your position regarding assault-style weapons? Would you ban them or restrict them in any way?
I'm not against banning or restricting assault-style weapons, but I believe as a driver on the roads that we must follow certain rules, like we always drive on the right side of the road. If everyone was able to drive any which way that they wanted, we'd have more accidents. And that seems to be what the environment that we have now with assault style weapons is, that there is very little regulation and they don't differentiate them from any other style of weapon. However, the assaults and the mass murders that we've seen in Florida have all used these assault style rifles and high capacity magazines where you can kill 50 people in a matter of 50 seconds. And that is unsustainable. I believe that we could license, just like as a driver, I would need a CDL license to drive a bus or a tanker truck. I think that proper licensing could be a part of the equation in reasonable gun control.
Thank you. Mr. Lynch?
As far as assault weapons, I believe, again, our rights to bear arms are very important to us and everybody. I believe currently everything is, now that we have red flag laws in the state of Florida, I believe that kind of cuts down on any questions we might have about them. But I think at this point, one of the biggest concerns would be about ghost guns right now, guns where there's absolutely no registration. You buy a gun, it's in a kit, it's not considered a gun because it's not assembled. You go home and you put 2 or 3 screws in it. That I think is going to create such a greater complex problem for us going forward than the use of any assault weapon.
Thank you. Mr. Lynch, do you support legislation to restrict the arrest of children to 12 years and up? Right now, there are children 6 and 7 who have been arrested, and that's what this concerns. What's the youngest that should be arrested?
Well, again, the youngest is, when I think about it, I mean, I'll be honest, this is a question I've never thought about before. 12, sure, but what do you do when a 10 or 11-year-old who has a maturity rate of a 15-year-old assaults or kills somebody, their neighbor that they're playing with? I mean, there has to be some accountability. So I would like to see, you know, I'm tough on crime. I think especially if it's anything that's violent, you need to do your time. But as far as an age restriction, I mean, I've seen 10-year-olds, like I said, mature as 12 years, and I've seen 20-year-olds that act like 15-year-olds. So I think probably 12 would be good. But again, this is an issue I'm going to honestly say, you know, give full transparency that I haven't really thought about much. So before I go into detail on what I do about that, I'd really like to research that more. Thank
you. Mr. Williams?
Yes, I take a science-based approach to this, and we really should not be incarcerating our children. The mind does not really fully develop until about the age of 22. And there are hiccups here and there that may interfere with a child's development. I do not believe that we should be having 6-year-olds given life sentences in prison when there is some way to reform them and change their direction, depending on the crime. If there are violent crimes, then we do need to hold them accountable. But I do not believe that we should be prosecuting these children as adults, which is now the system, and leaving them either available for the death penalty, which we have restricted, or giving them a life sentence when they are a burden to society rather than contributing to the health of our society.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, do you have any plans to address the economic fallout from COVID-19? And if you do, what are they?
Yes, there are going to be plenty of economic recoveries that we need to deal with. Number one is our affordable housing crisis. 913,000 Florida households pay more than 50% of their income, gross income, I should add, solely for housing. Once you add transportation to that, it gets up to about 58% or 60%. So many occupations, workers don't earn enough to rent a modest apartment or buy their first home. When families spend a large proportion on housing, that is money that's not spent elsewhere in Florida's economy. It is completely in housing. So I will immediately introduce legislation to increase supply and preserve existing affordable housing units, encourage zoning and land use promotions for affordable housing units, and develop communities of opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lynch, same question. Do you have any plans addressing the economic fallout from COVID-19, and what are they?
Okay, so this is a really tough thing because so many businesses have been hurt, so many families have been hurt. This is going to continue for a while, and anyone who tells you differently, I think, is just being overly optimistic, which is not always a bad thing. But in this case, we're going to see a greater fallout as our numbers increase. I think when you look at what we could do to how are we going to recover? What are we going to do? I think the best thing you could think of is what do we have right now, especially here in Southwest Florida? We have service industry. If we have further restrictions or this goes on and there's just not confidence for people to go out there, our businesses are still not going to, they're not going to be profitable. They're just not going to be able to maintain and sustain themselves. So again, this goes back to what I said at the very beginning. When I introduced myself, it is so crucial for us to have industry within our state, and especially in Southwest Florida, where we know we'll have jobs more than the service industry. So when we do get hurt by something, it's not our only sector. We have several sectors of businesses keeping us together. And again, if we have great industry, that's going to create a trickle-down effect for our businesses in our, from restaurants all the way through to clothing stores. That's probably the best plan, bringing more industry right down here.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. What measures would you propose regarding the control or ban of fracking?
Fracking, I'm completely against fracking. When you see a state like Oklahoma having earthquakes, it's kind of mind-boggling, and it's all been linked to fracking. I think our environment is too pristine to ruin with fracking. What are we really going to obtain from that? How many jobs would fracking bring in? How much money would it bring in at the cost of our environment? So fracking does not belong in the state of Florida, and personally, I don't think it belongs anywhere within the United States. It's an environmental nightmare. Again, you can go to the National Earthquake Center and track how many earthquakes are in Oklahoma every day, excuse me, all due to fracking. So fracking is something that Florida should never even consider.
Thank you. Mr. Williams?
Yes, I am. Sorry. Yes, I am also against fracking and offshore drilling. We had a ballot measure last cycle that said that we did not want offshore drilling. The exploration for oil and the need for fossil fuels, I see in a new economy going down. When we protect our lands and our waters, our natural springs, and we have a sustainable ranch and agricultural lands for development, we can start producing other alternative forms of energy. And the need to frack in our backyard is just unnecessary. So I also do not agree with any chemical breakdown of the mineral below the surface of our lands, and we need to include that in the ban. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Williams, what measures would you propose to reduce the effects of climate change? We've talked about a lot of them. What measures would you propose to reduce it?
Well, we need to rethink our community development. Right now, we have an urban sprawl. We have many single-family residence, gated communities. We also have high reliance on automobiles and vehicles with very little public transportation. So creating more walkable communities and infill would greatly reduce our carbon footprint given off by the need for a vehicle. I look at the toll road to nowhere, and I think that those funds could be much better used in a sustainable mass transit to get people quickly across the state without relying on every single person to drive their vehicle wherever they're going. Instead of spending money on widening roads, we know that a 2-lane road expanded to a 4-lane road, those 4 lanes will be full. And that just puts more vehicles on the road, puts more carbon into the air, and really affects our economy greatly.
Mr. Lynch?
Okay, so I think the use of electric vehicles is something that is really going to take off as the price drops. When you think of electric vehicles, you think of Tesla, but we're seeing more and more companies coming out with them. That's going to help quite a bit reducing carbon emissions. We also see more fuel efficient jets that are coming in. Again, flying into Southwest Florida, that'll bring our emissions down. Mass transit is very important, as well as, and I will mention this, the expansion of current roads, because we are a growing community. Even if we had mass transport, we would, just for our infrastructure, we would want to have a better road highway system, so to say. But I do think mass transit works, and share rides where employees from different companies, just imagine like Lee Health, which is it has so many employees, having share rides available. And this is done in a lot of companies where the companies actually subsidize and give a little bit extra to their employees who do a share ride. So I think incentives like that could help reduce carbon emissions.
Thank you. Mr. Lynch, do you have any plans to address agricultural runoff and septic tank leaks?
Well, yes, I definitely would like to work with. I think as far as agricultural runoff, we know one of the biggest culprits right now, and at least one of the persons who are always under fire, is the sugar industry. And I think rather than working against them, we need to work with them, bring in environmentalists, bring in the industry is not going to just collapse, but we have to figure out ways so that these phosphates are not being released into our water. We have to be able to work hand in hand. And I think what happens a lot, especially in politics, is you're on this side and you're on this side. You have to come together at some point. And I think to bring a team or a coalition together, this is going to be, other than lobbyists, we need actual people on both sides who understand agriculture and who actually understand the environmental impact, and bring them together in a nice forum to figure out some of these problems. But this is something major that's going on. Agriculture has to work in Florida and employs so many Floridians. And in addition to that, it provides great food for our table. So working hand in hand, I think, would be a great option.
Thank you. Mr. Williams?
Yes, absolutely. And the pollution really begins north of Okeechobee, through the Kissimmee rivers and down into the oxbows. We've unfortunately straightened out a lot of those oxbows that were natural, that were cleansing the water before it got into Lake O. So we're starting out with polluted water from the north. Then we have sugar adding to it, and then we have river communities that are adding to it with the septic. So it is just increasing and increasing by the time that it gets out into our Gulf of Mexico. So we do need to build coalitions right now. And we do need to bring the cattle farmer from north of the Okeechobee together with the sugar industry. And we need to make sure that we have a decent septic and sewer system so we prevent the runoff and have each of them give till it hurts to actually solve this issue once and for all.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, do you have plans for any other ideas regarding clean water? We've talked about other environmental legislation is what I'm talking about. And we didn't really talk about the topic of clean water, but we talked about some of the pollutants. I'm giving you an opportunity to now talk about whatever you think we need for environmental regulation.
All right. So water quality has meanings to different people. It has different meanings to different people because the coastal folks will say, well, I don't want the blue-green algae, or I don't like the red tide. I get sick when I get the red tide around me. But other water quality issues are the people out in Lehigh may not be able to drink their water because it's unclean and unsanitary because of pollution. So when we talk about water quality, we need to identify which water quality we're looking for. Are we looking for the tourist water quality? Or are we looking for a sustainable community water quality? And I will make sure that each and every family in Florida has safe, clean drinking water, and that they don't have to fear a Flint issue by eliminating lead pipes, and that they also don't have to boil their water before they use it. So thank you very much for the question.
Thank you. Mr. Lynch?
Again, I'd like to bring a coalition of both environmentalists and scientists together to come up with what we can do. You all know that there's no doubt, there's very few people in Florida who wouldn't argue that water is such an important issue, both for tourism, both for drinking water, both for our environment, both for our farming industry. It just goes on and on and on. And I think, again, when you bring coalitions of people together, again, I'm going to say not lobbyists, I want to bring environmentalists together. I want to bring them together with scientists. I want us to figure out the reasons why. If there's an agricultural problem, bring the agricultural division in with that and bring in their coalition. If it's something that's tourism, bring the tourism board in. But no matter what we do, we should, I believe that pretty much every candidate believes there needs to be some sustainability in protecting our water quality. Like Sean said, we don't want a Flint, Michigan problem happening here in Florida. This is something that we all, I think, are very, very deeply rooted to. And again, you're not going to do it on your own. You're going to need to work with different people, and you're going to have to work with people who you normally would sit across the table with. And I think that would be a great solution.
Mr. Lynch, do you propose any changes to the taxation of Floridians to address the COVID-19 shortfalls, or such as rainy day funds? Either
right.
Or?
As far as taxes, I'm someone who doesn't believe in tax increases. I believe that if we stay on a steady budget, we don't need to raise taxes. Taxes are, you could get taxed so many different times. We already are taxed so many times. If you just look at your cable bill with like 8 different taxes, or your phone bill, taxes go out of control and spin out of control. Keep spending down, and we won't need to do that. Now, you brought up a good point. I mean, with COVID, of course, our sales tax revenue is down. I think it's going to be something that we just have to say, okay, look, this happened to us. This is not a good thing. We're going to run a deficit. It's okay if we run a deficit for a few years. Sure, we don't want to do this, but we're going to have to do this in order to just get ourselves back to where we are, build up our funds again. But to tax us for the COVID incident would be, I think, highly wrong, because again, we know we're going to run in the red for a few years, and then we'll catch back up. We'll get to where we were before. Responsible spending, we'll do this.
Mr. Williams?
So I believe that in Florida, we should collect every dollar that is legally due. Now, I am a CPA. I specialize in state tax. We had a bill that Senator Gruters had introduced last year that would actually create a marketplace and charge sales tax on those items that were entering Florida and being used in Florida, and tax those at Amazon level. So they would collect the tax at the sale. Right now, what we have to do is we would have to issue a DR 15MO, a mail order, to every single resident in the state of Florida and ask them if they made any taxable out-of-state purchases. That would have increased our budget by $750 million the first year it was implemented. So when we begin to collect all of the legally collectible taxes that are due in the state of Florida, then I would support subsidizing it with additional taxes if necessary. But we do have to keep a balanced budget. That is a constitutional requirement.
Mr. Lynch, do you support legislation to prevent children under 16 from being housed in pretrial incarceration or sentenced in adult jails?
Absolutely. I mean, if you have a 16-year-old, a 16-year-old should not be mixed in with a 45-year-old. There's no reason for that. And I think that could lead to even further difficulties within that child's life if you want to talk about any kind of rehabilitation. Again, you know, mixing, we don't do that with anything else. So why would we do that? We don't mix kindergartners with high school students. So why would you mix a 15-year-old with a 45-year-old? It just doesn't make sense.
Thank you. Mr. Williams?
Yes, as a matter of fact, pretrial incarceration, we should really look at that as what effect does that have on society and communities. And especially if they are just arrested and charged and there's no admission of guilt or anything else, incarcerating that child, and especially with older adults, is, to me, unconscionable. And it is definitely unsustainable. We need to look at possible diversion programs for these children and find out what was the cause of that to happen. Why did it happen? And are we able to reform them and show the impact of their act, and not just their intention, but the impact of their act, and then go ahead and get them as a working citizen in our communities.
Okay, Mr. Williams, what changes other than what we have already addressed do you plan to make or plan to introduce or support in the next legislative session?
So a central tenet to our democracy is our vote. One of the first tasks as your representative, if elected, will be redistricting. I will only support fair redistricting maps that disallow officials to actually choose their voters and empower communities to select fair representative governments throughout Florida. We must ensure free and fair elections through electronic and digital security, early voting, and vote by mail. As your representative, I'll support and introduce legislation to secure and harden election data and require supervisors of election to preserve digital ballot images that are automatically created by digital voting equipment today. I support automatic voter registration, expanding early voting, and vote by mail to make our elections freer, fairer, and more accessible. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lynch?
I would support any type of legislation that would offer any type of tax incentives to bring in new industry within our community. Again, you know, I can't emphasize that enough, that we have 5 colleges within our district, 5 colleges, and we are exporting our talent because there are no jobs other than in the service industry. There are very few. There are jobs, but there's very few. Like I said the other night, when you look at a state like Alabama that just got a new Toyota is there. Why Alabama as opposed to the state of Florida? I think we need to attract industry. Georgia has a huge film industry. The state of Georgia, what does Georgia have that Florida doesn't have? You know, so we need to do whatever we can to, again, bring in industry. The more industry, and those are clean industries, by the way, too, by today's standards, software companies, corporate headquarters, all these great companies. Southwest Florida has so much to offer. So what we need to do is kind of sell ourselves to bring in more, again, clean industry, bring in more high-paying jobs. And I think my legislation would be to push to give any type of incentive we could to bring these industries here.
Okay, I've run out of questions. We haven't run out of time, but I've run out of questions. So we're going to give our closing statements now, and we'll start with Mr. Williams.
So again, I want to thank the League for this opportunity, and most of all, thanks to each and every one of you for being involved and watching these comments. Right now, we need a new guard in Tallahassee, a person to get things done, who isn't afraid to compromise, but who's solid and won't compromise his values. We need true district representation, the voice of its citizens, that they have a seat at the table. And we need to build a community where we can find some common ground, find some common purpose, and attain our priorities together. We've never needed you more than we need you today. So thank you. And if you would like more information on my campaign, you can visit williams478.com. Thank you, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you. Mr. Lynch?
I also would like to show my appreciation for the League and for anybody who watches any type of forum. I think that is so important to be informed. You might know a candidate, you might like a candidate, and then realize you don't like them, whatever the case might be. I think it's really important to be informed. Our issues coming up, of course, we know Southwest Florida, we have to protect our water. I stand for that. I stand, of course, as I've mentioned several times before, for bringing more industry in the area. So we are not exporting our talent. We're not sending our children and our grandchildren off to other cities or states in the hopes of getting a better job and creating a better future for them. They can have that all here. We need to work on that. And I think every state rep should really be on board with working with whoever they need to do to bring whatever industry we need to bring. And again, I like to say clean industry. There are clean industries out there. It's a foundation. I also think our quality of life is very important. My educational platform, you know, a 28-year-old person should know how to buy a house, should know what points are when they buy a house, should know what their 401 consists of, what stocks are, what bonds are, how to use a credit card and not pay 28% interest and pay the minimum payment and pay 3 years for this one stupid product they bought 3 years ago that don't remember what they bought. We need to be financially strong. If our students are financially strong, then our community will be financially strong. These are really important issues. And in healthcare, I could just tell you, we are being mandated. If you think you have a good insurance policy, I will tell you what, you are being mandated behind the scenes on what you can have, what you can't have. And when you look at the average Floridian paying anywhere from $3,500 to $5,600 in out-of-pocket expenses and additions to their pharmacy benefit plans, this is no place. A family should not pay more for health care than what they pay for their mortgage. And again, you know, I think open markets are our answer. And these are all things I'd like to achieve. My website is charlielynchforflorida.com. And again, thank you for listening and thank you for having us here today.
Thank you. That concludes the forum for House District 78. I want to thank both of you gentlemen. You answered a lot of questions today, and you answered them very well. Thank you very much. I wish both of you great luck in the election, and that's it. Goodbye.
Okay, Sean and Jim. Bye. See you guys.
Thanks, Charlie.